Now, the widow gave about between 68 cents and $1.22. Oh my, isn't it a fraction of a penny we've learned all of our lives? Well, yes, back when a fraction of a penny could buy something. So all the coins over there, I talked to David Hendon, who wrote this book. He is the guru of Bible coinage, okay? So he and I went back and forth a little bit, and he was kind enough to go through my coins over there and make sure they were all actually real coins, okay? He found one that was not. He says, I don't know what this is. He found one, he says, you've been had. If you read about, you can read about that in my book. We went to Jerusalem, and I went to a very respected antiquities dealer, and he sold me the remaining coin that I lacked in my collection for that Hasmonean collection over there of silver, of Prutah, okay, bronze Prutah, okay. He sold me a fake. He didn't know it at the time. David Hendon kind of got on to me. I said, I'm so mad at, I won't say his name, in case you go to Jerusalem and go to this antique. I'm so mad at blank. And David Hendon said, well, don't be so mad at him, because a lot of times these people don't really know what they have, what they're selling. What he sold me was an overstrike. He took it, and what I'm passing around there, you'll see some Alexander Jannaeus Lepton, okay? Those were very ubiquitous. Those were very cheap, okay? You can get them for $20, $30 today or whatever, okay? Back then, they were everywhere. But what they did in modern times is they took a Alexander Jannaeus Prutah and overstamped it, but a very rare coin, a Jewish leader that didn't rule for very long. He didn't stamp many coins, but they took this very ubiquitous Lepta and overstamped it with his stamp, okay, modern times, and they tried to sell that off as an antiquity. This is a Denarius. This is just a loose Denarius. I have all my denarii over there in the display. So this is under Domitian, okay. All right, chapter 14, money and weights. This is one of my favorite chapters. Good thing, because when we get to chapter 15, we talk about Greek gods. I don't want to talk about that, but we're going to talk about it some, okay, because I did not enjoy writing about Greek gods, but I felt I needed to explain what Christians had to deal with at the time, okay? So, but we're on one of my favorite topics now, is money. Some of you might like it, some of you may not. We're going to talk some math. Oh, dear. I can see some of you getting like kind of that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. We're going to talk about math. All right. So even though they were crooks, have some respect, please, for the money changers. We'll see why. Now, there are many definitions of money. If you go to the websites of the Federal Reserve banks, they all disagree, which is kind of interesting. When I was researching the book, I thought, well, every Federal Reserve bank should have the exact same definition of money, right? No, they don't. Even within their own website, if you go and rummage around some, you see different definitions of money. But let's look at some common definitions of money. It must be durable. It must be portable. It must be divisible. All these things make sense, right? It must have a limited supply. It must be acceptable. It must be uniform. Okay? Now, if you go to a different website, they'll come up with something different. That's kind of an accepted definition of money. And what really is money? Who cares? Who knows? What? If I have a dollar bill in my pocket, it's just a piece of paper. If I have a $100 bill in my pocket, it's a piece of paper that's worth about the same as a dollar bill if you look at the paper content, right? But it's who decided what that $100 bill has as value, okay? We as a group have decided, and I mean we as the world group have decided that a $100 bill is worth $100. If that confidence ever goes away, then that $100 bill will become worth less, okay? So what is money? These 6 characteristics and more or less, depending on who you look at. Now, we're going to study 4 different ways to look at money. We're going to look at history of money, where it started, how it all began. We're going to look at the denominations of money. In our parlance, we would call them pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, dollar bills, whatever. Okay? We look at the appearance of money. In my lifetime, there have been 4 redesigns of the $100 bill. Okay? I was born in 61. 4 redesigns. The appearance of the money has changed of the $100 bill over that time. The $1 bill, I don't think, has changed in that amount of time, because who cares? No one's going to try to create fake dollar bills. They're going to create fake $100 bills. That's why we're trying to keep up with the counterfeiting, okay, by creating new appearance of money. Debasement, inflation or actual clipping of the money. In other words, back in the Roman Empire, they would clip denarii. In fact, this denarii here, I don't know if it's clipped or just broken or whatever, but you see it's kind of an irregular shape. So what sometimes people do, they would shave off some of the silver. These are actual silver, a certain content of silver. So you get a bunch of these, you shave off just a little bit on each one, and all of a sudden you got a pile of silver there that's worth something, okay? That's debasement. That's a way of debasement. And then also the content of silver changed over time. I'll show you an example of that in just a minute when we talk about denarii. We'll study and compare the money of 4 different cultures: Greeks, Romans, Jewish, and us. And can we do that? The question is, can we get a good idea of what a denarius was worth? Can we get a good idea of what a lepton was worth? They're going around here somewhere, okay? And the answer is, in my opinion, yes. Okay, we can. And I'll show you that as we go along. Before we get going into the subject of money, I want to talk to you about some translations of money, okay? And I want to pick out a specific verse, Matthew 18:28. Now, I know there's the rest of context. I'm not doing the context here, and you'll see why, because I'm looking at just a piece of money here. I'm looking at specifically 100 denarii. And the verse is, but that same slave, as he went out, now this is the slave that owed the king 10,000 talents. He owed the king a whole bunch of money. And this guy went out, and that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, "Pay me what you owe." What does that mean? How much is a denarii? Does anybody know? If you've not read my chapter, does anybody know? What's that?
It's a base salary.
That is correct. That is correct. And we're going to use that little piece of information right there to open up a whole broad spectrum of things to come. Okay? We'll get to it. All right. There are 3 different camps of translation on this. In green, I have the translations where they call it back what it was called in the day. Okay? The Lexham English Bible, 100 denarii. The New American Standard Bible, 100 denarii. Okay? Does that help us in our English understanding today? No, but yes, it's precise. It's a precise translation from the original, okay? But it doesn't help us really understand. There's another camp that went and translated into the money of our current day. For example, a penny. Wait. The King James Bible, or 100 pence. What's a pence? Well, I just got through telling you that was a translation into the modern language of our day. Well, that was the modern language of 1611, a pence. They understood what a pence was. They understood what a shilling was, okay? Do we? I doubt it. I mean, maybe you do, but I doubt it, okay? Yeah.
But the absolute number isn't important.
No, it's not. We'll get to that. You're right. We'll get to that, okay? So that... Stop stealing my thunder. All right. Another camp is some don't pick a side and they're pretty non-committal. For example, in blue, we see here 100 coins or some tiny sum or 100 silver coins. Okay? All right. Some that I'm highlighting in red seem just wrong. And I'm going to prove to you that 100 denarii was worth about, not going to prove, but I'm going to show you some real solid circumstantial evidence that 100 denarii is worth about $4,300. These translations say a few dollars. Now, is there anyone in here who thinks $4,300, even with our inflation today, that $4,300 is a few dollars? Or if it's $10, or if it's, no, some tiny sum. So my point is 100 denarii is 100 days' wage for a common worker.
That's what I was going to say. If you say it's 100 days' wage, it's like $43 a day.
$43 a day. That's right.
To us, that would be minimal.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to prove to you, if you're working at McDonald's, that's about right.
Yeah.
Well, okay. If you're working at McDonald's for the official minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Now, I'm going to talk about all. Y'all are getting so ahead of me. Stop it now. All right. I think these are probably not as correct as they could be. However, it's a contrast. It's a comparison and contrast. This guy owed the king 10,000 talents. I'm going to show you that that's probably about $2.6 billion. That's a lot of money. $4,600 compared to $2.6 billion, that's a few dollars. It's the relative comparison between the two, right? Okay. So the translations, I can give them a break for translating it a few dollars. because it was the relative, a few dollars to a bunch of dollars. Okay, but it was not really specifically a few dollars. It was about $4,300, a few $1,000s. There's one on here actually that comes really close. The New Living Translation says a few $1,000s. I like that. But guess what the poor guys in the New Living Translation had to go through probably when they translated this, are saying, okay, no one else has translated it this way, and we're going to translate it a few $1,000s. Oh dear, we're going to get in trouble, right? But they did it anyway. And I think they're probably the closest of the one who translate it to current money to the current day. All right. Enough of that, because we need to get to the other stuff because y'all are chomping at the bit. I can tell. All right. Next up, the history of money and the Jews. Now, the Jewish monetary system was originally based on the sexagesimal system of the Babylonians. Okay. 60s. We still have a lot of that today. 60 seconds per minute, 60 minutes per hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Okay, there's a lot of that Babylonian sexagesimal system left over for us. Okay, but originally a talent was 60 minutes. Okay, and we'll talk about how that changed to an Egyptian system, which was a decimal system later on. Okay, so 60 minutes ultimately became 50. Okay, I'll get to the specifics of that in just a minute. I can't believe the bell's ringing already. Metals were weighed, not counted up until the time of the Babylonian exile. We see in Deuteronomy 25, he says, you shall not have in your bag two kinds of weights, large and small. This is a warning about cheating. The Persians probably introduced the Jews to coinage. A gold stater called a derrick, named after Darius I, invented from the 500s to the 330s BC. And a silver coin called the siglois, possibly the required payment of the temple tax under Nehemiah. Okay, when the temple came along, the second temple, under Zerubbabel, and then got transformed into the Herodian temple under Herod the Great, that temple tax became a Tyrian half shekel, which I have over there in that small frame. Okay, so go look at that when we're done. All right. The Phoenician standard became the most standard, became the favored standard throughout the region. With the Tyrian shekel, I have a Tyrian shekel over there and a half shekel in that small frame. Okay, so go look at that. That became the most favored coin because it was a very specific, consistent silver content. It was a very specific size and weight and all that kind of thing, okay? So you could count on that. If you got Tyrian shekels, you knew you were getting a certain amount of silver. Okay, it was not debased like the denarii had become. Okay, under some of the emperors before Nero, denarii went from I'm going to get to that 4.5 grams down to 3.8 grams under Nero. Okay, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Jews were allowed to mint bronze coins, but silver and gold coins were reserved for the imperial mints. All right. Now, we know all the history. As I told you before, we went through the history and we went through all that pain and suffering. So when we get to these other topics, we can look back and say, oh, I remember that. I remember Denny talking about that. So remember the history of the Seleucids when they came in and took Coal Syria. Okay, they became weaker and weaker as time went on because of their internal struggles, fighting amongst kings and wannabe kings and all that kind of thing. Okay, they became weaker due to enemies without. Okay, like the Parthians, the Egyptians, the Romans, etc. Okay, so their dominance over the Jews weakened as a result. And as a result of that, Jonathan obtained the high priesthood and the governor of Judea and Samaria, but he was also given exemption from annual tribute tax paid to the Syrians. And then Simon, his brother, received concessions from Demetrius for the abolishment of all taxes, and the Syrian garrison was vacated, and the Jews deferred on Simon the title of leader and high priest forever. We talked about that. And the Syrians, and specifically under Antiochus VII, Sidetes, granted Simon and the Jews the right to mint coins. Now, Simon probably didn't do that. You'll see my first coin over there in my left-hand frame is a Prutah or a Lepton of John Hyrcanus. Okay, so Simon did not ever get around to minting coins, we don't believe. After Sidetes had prevailed over Drachm, he reneged on his promises, go figure, to the Hasmoneans and no longer allowed them to mint coins, but the Hasmoneans did continue to mint bronze Prutah, as you can see in the frame over there, but they were not allowed to mint silver and gold coins. Those were only allowed through the imperial mints. Now, let's do a quick overview of Jewish money. If you have the book, this is on page 474 through 476. We're going to talk about the things that are in bold here. The lepton, the widow's mite. You know, that's a term everybody knows, right? Everybody knows widow's mite. It's completely wrong. It's completely fabricated. It has nothing to do with it. The King James people didn't even use mites. They didn't even call them mites. It It was borrowed from somewhere else. We'll talk about that next week, okay? We'll talk about the Prutah, which is basically 2 leptons make a Prutah. And all these references, there's a bunch of references to money in the Bible. The shekel, there's certainly a bunch of references in the Bible and Josephus works, etc. The mina and the talent. When you start getting the bigger things like the mina and the talent and the heavy talent, these were all weights, not money, not coins. Okay, so we're going to talk about all those. A talent was probably an equal weight for all metals, but you could have a talent of silver, you have a talent of gold, you have a talent of bronze or whatever. Okay, and it was a weight such that a single man could carry it. Okay, we see a lot of the history of these rulers, Seleucid rulers or whatever, coming in and stealing so many talents from the treasury. Pilate coming in and stealing so many talents from the treasury in order to build this waterworks project that the Jews were so mad about. Okay, so those are talents. And it sometimes specifies whether they're gold talents or silver talents or whatever. Okay. All right. So next week, we'll pick up with the lepton, which are those over there, the lepton or Prutah. The left-hand frame or lepton or Prutah of all of, again, the Hasmonean rulers, starting with John Hyrcanus, all the way through a silver denarius representing the fall of Jerusalem by Vespasian. Okay. Please go check those out. They're trouble to bring, so you're going to hurt my feelings if you don't check them out. Okay. The Zimbabwe dollar, $50 trillion bill is over there. And then, again, the silver denarii of the Roman emperors. And then the Tyrian shekels, which are very rare. I didn't ever get a chance to talk about all my coins up here. I'll have to bring them next week. We'll talk about obols. We'll talk about tetradrachms. We'll talk about denarii. We'll talk about all these different things next week. This week, we're going to get into the specific denominations of money, specifically Jewish money, Greek money, and Roman money, and all the different kinds of monies that they had to deal with in the Intertestament and New Testament times. It was quite a complex, it still is quite a complex subject. It's been good for me to go through and study all this again, because I'm learning more things even as I go through and look at it again. I am also doing more comparisons of money then to money now. And I'm proving more to myself that the assumptions I made and doing that conversion, because you have to do money piece conversions, you have to do time conversions, what the Roman work week was like compared to our work week. So those kind of conversions, the more I've looked into this and the more I've looked at individual pieces of information, the better I feel about the process that I've gone through and done that. We're going to go through all that. I don't know if we'll get to that today or not, but by next week we should be able to get to that. So anyway, before we get to that, you're just going to have to, as I come across and say a denarius is worth $43, you're just going to have to trust me for now that there is some circumstantial evidence to back that up. Okay, there's not proof of that. There can never be proof of that, probably. But there is circumstantial evidence that supports that statement, that a denarius is worth $43, okay? We'll get to that as we get to it. Don't forget, over here I have money. I have all the Jewish leaders of Judea and Judea from John Hyrcanus I, the Hasmonean, all the way through all the Herodians, the prefects, the procurators, all the way through. And I've got one coin representing Vespasian. A silver denarius is the last one in that case. Vespasian, who conquered Jerusalem in AD 70. So that's all the Jewish Prutah through a silver Vespasian denarius, okay? The other case over there, the other frame over there, are all the silver denarii of all the emperors of the New Testament, from Augustus, we know all the history about all that, right? All the way through Trajan. I'm using Trajan as a representation of the end of the New Testament, as that's about the time John died. He died about 100 AD. So I'm calling his death the end of the New Testament, kind of quote unquote. Okay, so that's what that right hand frame is. I have a $50 trillion bill over there that I talked about last week from Zimbabwe. If we could only pay off our national debt in Zimbabwe money, we'd be good to go. We'd have a little left over, wouldn't we? That'd be all right. Yeah, they can't do that. In the front little frame there, I have a Tyrian shekel and a Tyrian half shekel. Very rare these days. They were the temple tax. We're going to get into all that detail later on. We're going to talk about what they were worth and why they were used for the temple tax, that kind of thing. Okay, so be sure and check that out. On this table here, I have a bunch of different coins. I have silver denarii. I've got tetradrachms. I've got obols. Actually, I've got obols over there. I've got some more Prutah. Lots of Prutah there, Lepton. We will talk about what all those pieces of money are today. So when you look at these, you will understand them. So I'll bring them today, or I have brought them today, and I'll probably bring them next week also. So you should be able to understand more as we go along. All right. I'm worn out now. See y'all next week. All right, Jewish money overview. We start with a lepton. Here I have a lepton. Okay. It's the smallest denomination available to the Jews. Okay. And then I have Prutah, which is a little bit bigger than lepton. That's worth 2 leptons. There goes my lepton. So this is an Alexander Jannaeus minted coin, and this is a Prutah of Herod Agrippa I. Okay. Notice the size is about twice the size, twice the weight. Now, there's some disagreement in the literature about what leptons and Prutah are, or Lepta and Prutah. Okay, if you use the correct plural terminology for that. Okay, some people thought that it was just minting. The mintage is very crude. If you look at the stamping on this, it's off center. The weights vary pretty greatly. But some people believe they really were truly different coins. And I'm kind of going toward that latter camp, that they really are different coins. And the reason is, I asked an AI last night, and I really never had this clear in my mind, and it's still not 100% clear. But I asked an AI last night, I said, and I can read all the books. I read David Hendon's book. By the way, if you want a good book on biblical coins, David Hendon's book is the one to get. Okay, he's the one that graded all my coins over there. Said they are verily, they really are all Prutah. Okay, but if you go through his book, it's not clear the distinction between Lepta and Prutah. If you go through the other, I've got a half a bookshelf probably of coins of the Bible at home. If you go through all those books, it's not clear to me a difference between a lepton and a Prutah. Okay. But I asked the AI last night, I said, what's the difference between a lepton and a Prutah? And it said, Perplexity said, a lepton was minted during the time of Alexander Jannaeus. These are ubiquitous. If you go buy in a store somewhere a widow's mite, you can buy them anywhere. You can buy them online. You can go to thrift stores or whatever. If you buy a lepton of Alexander Jannaeus, they're everywhere. I mean, there's millions of them probably. Okay, so that's what a lot of these are. At least 4 of these that I have are Alexander Jannaeus lepton. So the AI said that lepton were minted by Alexander Jannaeus and Prutah were minted by everybody else. And that's a simplistic statement. It's more complex than that. But in general, lepton was a small coin, about half the weight of this bigger coin, the Prutah. I'll get to that detail in just a minute. I'll put these out here for you to look at. So over here, I've got tetradrachms, obols. I've got everything as we go through. All right. So Gera, we won't talk. Everything in bold here, we'll talk about some more detail. Gera is a 1/20th or 1/24th of a shekel. We have talk in the Bible of 1/4 of a shekel, a becca, a pim. A shekel, of course, we'll talk about. The mina is 50 or 60 shekels, depending on the time frame. A talent is 60 minas. A heavy talent is 2 talents. And we also see in the Bible pieces of money and pieces of silver. Okay, now if I had to, I've got these charts in the book. I'm not that crazy about them, but I'm not sure how I'd redo them if I did them. Okay, the lepton, or these lepta, are the little blue dots here. Okay, there's 2 lepta per Prutah. I've denoted by this square or this rectangle. Okay, inside a gera are between 10 and 12 Prutah. Okay. Based on the time frame, again, of when you're looking at things. So this is a gera, between 10 and 12 Prutah. A gera, there's 10 of those, or 12, per becca. Now this becca, these terms are terms you'll see in the Old Testament often. And these really refer to weights back then. I'll show you that in just a second. Okay. But they did also become coins as time went on. So we have 2 beccas then that make a shekel. Now, that's everything that's shekel and smaller. For shekels and bigger, we go to this chart over here. We have each one of these green things is a shekel. Okay? So it takes 60 shekels or 50 shekels to make up a mina. A mina, it takes 60 of those to make up a talent. So you see when they talk about a talent in the Bible, that's a lot of money. That's 3,600 shekels or 3,000 shekels, depending on the time again. If you're based on the Babylonian, money's complex, I'm telling you. If it's based on the Babylonian system, back in the day, before the exile, 3,600 shekels, okay? Once we move to the decimal system, the Egyptian influence, we get to 3,000 shekels, okay? Everybody follow me so far? Clear as mud? Yay! A talent could be any kind of money. You could have a talent of iron, and that wouldn't be worth as much. But it's an amount that one man could carry. I'll show you that in the Bible here in just a minute, okay? You can have a talent of silver. That is obviously worth more than a talent of iron, okay? You can have a talent of gold that a man can carry. That's a lot of money, okay? It's talked about in the Old Testament when they talk about building a temple. And I'll show you some verses on that in just a minute. The people contributed so many talents of gold, they contributed this many talents of silver, and they contributed this many talents of iron, etc. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little more detail in just a minute. So that is a talent. All right. Now, so let's start. So that's the overview. Let's start out with the lepton, the lowly lepton, which I have 4 over here. If you consider Alexander Jannaeus coins leptons. Now we remember who Alexander Jannaeus was, right? Everybody smile, right? Okay, not so much. That was week number, it was a way long time ago. I don't remember. All right, so the lepton is bronze, made mainly by Alexander Jannaeus. The plural of lepton is lepta, means small or thin. It's probably the widow's mite of Mark 12 and Luke 21, likely the smallest denomination of coin available, worth about 3 minutes of an average daily wage of an unskilled worker. Where did I come up with that? I just made it up. Actually, I did. I just kind of made it up with some analysis, and I will show you that later. About 2.8 minutes of wage of an unskilled worker, and I will support that with some circumstantial evidence here in a minute. Very crude mintage. You'll notice as you look at those, some things are off-center. You don't get the full thing. This is actually a very high-quality picture of an Alexander Jannaeus lepton that I got off the internet. Mine are not that high quality. Maybe I will look around some more and see if I can find some high-quality ones. Again, they're ubiquitous. There's a bunch of them. You're more likely to get a high-quality lepton than you're going to get a high-quality Tyrian shekel. Okay, makes sense because there's so many of these. It's possible lepton was just a small Prutah, given the manufacturing consistency of the day. Some people insist that that's the case. That Prutah and lepton are basically the same, and there's even double Prutah. So lepton, Prutah, double Prutah. They're saying these really are the same. Just the grossness of the mintage. You know, Roman or Jews were pouring molten bronze into a thing, and another guy was stamping them. You know, how accurate can you be when you're doing that kind of thing? The widow's mite did not exist at the time of the King James New Testament. The farthing was actually the smallest denomination of coin during that time. The term widow's mite may have come from the 16th century arithmetic book, where it was used to denote a fraction of a farthing. That kind of makes sense. And really a conceptual term as opposed to an actual coin in the King James Version. It could have been that Tyndale, who did this first in 1525, it could be that he was influenced by the Flemish monetary system in which a mite did exist. But widow's mite really is a misnomer in the King James Bible. Okay, technically, it's a lepton, or many mites are lepta. All right, lepta in the Bible. I've got 3 different passages there. I'm going to read one of these, Luke 21, 1 through 4. He looked up, Jesus, and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins, lepta. He said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they contribute all their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in all she had to live on. Okay. Now, the widow gave about between 68 cents and $1.22. Oh my, isn't it a fraction of a penny we've learned all of our lives? Well, yes, back when a fraction of a penny could buy something. Can a fraction of a penny buy anything today? Actually, when you go into Walmart, what can you buy for a penny? Nothing. What?
We're going to stop making.
Yeah, we're going to stop making them. That's how worthless they are. Okay. So this fraction of a penny that some of these translations have used is no longer valid in our inflation-laden world. Okay. Between 68 cents and $1.22. We'll show how we got to that later. The Prutah, number 2, a little bit bigger than a lepton. We know that it's during the Herodian periods. The Hasmonean and Herodian periods is 1/384th of a shekel. And during the Roman period, it was 1/256th of a shekel. We know that 1 Prutah is equal to 2 lepta, as I just went through. There's bronze also. The plural of Prutah is Prutat. Minted by the Jews starting the Hasmonean period. Over there, it is believed, I think David Hendon thinks this too, that the first Prutah was probably minted by John Hyrcanus. That's the first one on the coin in the thing over there. The Jews were given permission to mint coins by the Seleucids back then, but they just never got around to it until John Hyrcanus the first, okay, like in the frame over there. And they continued up through the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 with all the Herodians, the prefects and procurators, etc., minting these Prutah all that time. Even the Jewish rebels minted Prutat, and they actually minted silver shekels during the war. And I've got 2 examples of Jewish shekel war minted coins, okay, during the Jewish war over there. I saw in the news just a couple of weeks ago where they found a year 4 coin, very, very valuable. And I think I actually have a year for a coin. And I think I mentioned that last week. I'm not sure it's real because I would think I wouldn't be able to afford that. I don't know. The Prutah was approximately equal to a Roman quadrans. We start seeing a crossover between Jewish money and Roman money. We're also going to see that crossover to Greek money. So we can equate all these things. And that makes all of our calculations work out. My website, all this math that I'm showing you today and next week, okay, that's what backs up the money calculator on the website. Because of manufacturing irregularities, some historians believe Lepton is simply a small Prutah, or, as I mentioned, Lepta were minted primarily by Alexander Jannaeus, while Prutah were minted primarily by the other Hasmonean, Herodian, and Roman rulers. I went and looked in my chart. If you have the book, you can go. I've got a whole table in here on all the coins that not all the coins I have, but all the Lepta that I have. And I went just out of curiosity, and I looked at the weight of all the Alexander Jannaeus coins that I have. This is not the universe of them. This was 4 coins, and I came out with 1.32 grams on average. I then looked at the universe of coins that I have of all the other Lepta, Prutah, that I have, and their weight averages 2.10 grams. Okay, so I'm kind of going with Perplexity's answer that a Lepton really was minted by Alexander Jannaeus and everybody else minted a Prutah, but don't know the answer to that, and people will argue with me on that, who are coin experts. All right, the shekel is the base unit of Jewish money. Modern Israeli shekels are still in use today. If you go over there, silver shekels were the most common. The Hasmoneans minted Jewish shekels for a short time, but they were not minted again until the first Jewish revolt. Again, those coins are very rare. Jews typically used Tyrian shekels in the New Testament. Again, that's what's in a small frame laying down over there. They were from the Phoenician city of Tyre, minted from 126 BC to AD 66. They were high-quality mintage, almost pure silver. I say almost. The temple required a silver half shekel for the temple tax that every Jew male should pay. But a silver half shekel was not 100% silver. So there's something called a Kolbon. There was a tax on the tax. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about what that is. Okay, that's where the money changers come in also. All right. These had replaced tetradrachms of Alexander the Great. Same weight, same monetary value. But when somebody conquers somebody, you're not going to use their own money. If the Nazis had conquered us back in the 40s, we would not be using dollars today. So by the time Alexander the Great had gone away, late Intertestament, New Testament times, these Tyrian shekels had replaced the tetradrachm of Alexander the Great. Now, in 126 BC, Tyre was freed from Seleucid control and were allowed to mint their own money. And they started minting these Tyrian shekels with a picture of Heracles Melkart on the front, which is a Greek god, okay? And that replaced the Seleucid image of the king on the front. Now, if I want to go get a series of Seleucid coins, I can get, I think, everything. No, that's not true. I can get several Seleucid coins with a picture of the Seleucid ruler on there. Antiochus Grypus, I can get a picture of him. I know that, okay? So some of these coins, I can get pictures of these rulers on here. They put the picture of one of their Greek gods, okay? We're going to get to why the Jews wanted to accept this picture, a coin with a picture of a Greek god on it. Why would they do that? They're so anti-graven images, right? We'll talk about that. I'm always trying to get ahead of myself. Will y'all stop it? Stop letting me get ahead of myself. All right. So these Tyrian shekels, a half shekel was required payment of the temple tax, and they were worth about 3 1/3 denarii at first and worth about 4 denarii later on. All right, more about the Tyrian shekel. It may have possibly been, and I don't remember if I have a KP coin over there or not. I think it is. But anyway, it's possible they were minted at Jerusalem for a short time. There's 2 schools of thought on this, that KP coins, you'll see a KP on the front, stands for Kratos Romania, power of the Romans, okay? KP coins, some believe that they were minted by Herod the Great in Jerusalem. They were lower quality coins. Some believe the KP coins were minted prior to the non-KP coins. We don't know the answer to that. If you read a book, one person will say one thing. If you read another book, this person will say another thing. Okay. So Herod may have started minting these coins about 19 or 18 BC, and then he added KAP, which is then shortened to KP, the power of the Romans, and then others say the KP coins were minted before. All right. The male Jew paying the temple tax would not satisfy his tax burden with a Tyrian half shekel. Denny, have you lost your mind again? And you all say that every week. But if you took a half shekel to the temple, which was the temple tax, and you gave it to the priest, he would say, that's not enough, because it's not 100% silver. So it was, and this is all talked about in this book quite a bit. And I never actually saw that anywhere except for this book here. Like I say, he's kind of the guru. He really is the guru on biblical coinage. So the temple priest would say that's not enough because that's not 100% silver. So there's something called a tax. There's a Kolbon on that. Okay. Now, the Kolbon is a fee charged by the money changers, basically a tax on a tax. The Mishnah provides two different possible values of the Kolbon, either a mayah, and we talked about a mayah just a minute ago, or a half a mayah. All right. Now, if you want to go through the math, it's in the book, but here's all the different combinations of how much the Kolbon was. If a mayah was 1/24 of a shekel, then you've got the column here. There's 4 different possibilities. And the Kolbon was either half a mayah or 1 mayah. Then the total fee in Prutah was, you see those there. And then I calculated the percent fee. So the percent fee, the Kolbon fee, was between 4.2% and 10% of the tax itself. Okay. And I think this was probably what the money changers got. I might need to study that a little bit more. I'm not sure. So anyway, the Kolbon talked about in this book a lot. You won't see that. I mean, go ask your AI or something this afternoon. That'd be interesting to see what it says. I did not do that. All right. A little bit more about the Tyrian shekel. Now, as I mentioned, why would Greek authorities accept a coin with Heracles Melkart on there? Why? Remember, the Jews were so anti-image. Remember, Pilate brought in standards into Rome, and they just threw a fit. He wasn't even parading them around. He just brought them basically into his residence. Okay? Remember, Herod the Great put an eagle. I'm not sure we actually covered this during Herod's time, but he put an eagle, image of an eagle, above the temple gate, and the Jews threw a fit. Why? These were graven images. They were not all about graven images. But money has a graven image on it. And worse than that, it's not just an eagle, it's not just an animal. If you notice on my Prutah here, none of them have an image on them of a god or a person or an animal. They have pictures of pomegranates and stars with rays and anchors and dots and things like that. Never a person, an animal. Okay? So, why would they accept this? Well, the Mishnah says that money is clean when used as money. Pretty convenient. But it's unclean if used for jewelry or weight. Okay, and I've got the reference down here. Okay, and I showed you a Mishnah 2 or 3 weeks ago. All right. The eagle and the standards were meant for viewing or as being used in an artistic perspective. Okay, so that was not good to the Jews. However, used as money, it was a necessary part of commerce to be able to use these Tyrian shekels. So, if you look at all the Prutah in the displays, if you look at all the Prutahs over here on the table, you'll not see an image of a single ruler over Judea except for Philip the Tetrarch. And our BDEL, he was D, right? The death of Jesus. Remember, Archelaus, Antipas, Philip the Tetrarch ruled all the regions that Herod the Great ruled. That was broken up by Augustus and his will, and Herod the Great's will. Okay. Philip ruled over here in Etruria, Gaulonitis, Trachonitis. Okay. He was not ruling Jews. Yeah, maybe probably a few Jews, but not in general. He was not ruling Jews. So you can actually go and buy and see coins with Philip the Tetrarch's image on them because he didn't care. He wasn't ruling over Jews. The people he ruled over didn't care. The Jews that Archelaus was ruling over cared. You won't see any of those images on any of those coins. All right. So we know that Herod did place an image of an eagle on one of his coins. I think it's kind of a jab to the Jews, like, put an eagle above the temple gate, I'll do it again. Ha! So you can see that if you go look at some of Herod's coins. And Pilate, always the one to kind of stir up the Jews, he put images of Roman religious symbols on his coins. He put the libation ladle, a symbolum, which is used during pagan sacrifices, a litus, which is a curved staff carried by Roman priests, okay, and a wreath symbolized Roman power and imperial cult. So Pilate was always one to stir the Jews up whenever possible. All right, Jewish shekels in the Bible. In the Old Testament, they were typically weights. I'll show you that in just a minute. Let me show you one verse, Genesis 23:15. Ephron answered Abraham, "My Lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead." So a shekel of silver was a weight of silver. They probably didn't have coins back then, but he could hand them 400 coins. But they did have weights that they carried around with them. I'll show you that in the next slide. So he could weigh, okay? They both have weights, and they should be the same. In fact, it's forbidden in the Bible to carry different weights, and I'll talk about this in a minute, to carry different weights in your backpack. Don't have one weight that says a shekel is this much and a weight that says a shekel is this much. because that's cheating. Because depending on what transaction you're in, you might grab this lower weight and, to pay off somebody, or you might grab the higher weight to get paid by somebody. Okay, the Bible explicitly forbids having two different weights in your backpack. Kind of cool. Okay, so 400 shekels of silver was 400 weights, 400 ounces or whatever of silver. I don't know what that translates to. All right. Tyrian shekels in the New Testament. I'll read a couple of verses to you. Matthew 17, however, so that we do not give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook. Take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a coin, which could be a Tyrian shekel, could be a Greek stater, could be a Greek tetradrachm. Okay, but we're going to assume that in this case it's a shekel, a Tyrian shekel. Take that and give it to them for you and me. All right. In Matthew 26, and one of the 12 is called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, Tyrian shekels. That probably really is likely Tyrian shekels because the temple had a bunch of them, right? They were the temple tax. So they had a bunch of them. That's what they paid Judas. You can see what they paid Judas in that small frame over there as a Tyrian shekel. All right. Now, this are shekels through the ages. Back in the Old Testament, it was weights. You would have weights in your backpack. So if you're paid silver, you would get a chunk of weight that's equal to this weight. So hopefully you're pretty good at weighing things, by just your hands. By the time we got to the Intertestament in 120s BC, we had the Tyrian shekel over there, all the way up through AD 66, I believe it was. We have Jewish war shekels, which I do not have. They're pretty rare. Just minted for a couple of years during the Jewish War, 2 or 3 years. And they also minted Prutah over there that I do have. If you go to Israel today, you'll see these kind of coins and these kind of bills. You'll see a 10 agarot coin, which is 10 hundredths. It's kind of like our penny, or it's a dime, kind of like their dime. Okay. So there's 100 agarots per shekel. We have a half shekel, which is 50 agarots. There's a full shekel, 2, 5, 10. And we start getting the bills, 20, 50, 100, 200. I'm not sure if I have all those or not, but go to Israel and prove me right or wrong, I guess. And I wish I brought some of that money back with me when I come back, but I didn't. Maybe when we go again, I'll do that. All right. 1 Israeli shekel right here is worth about 30 cents, 30 US cents. Okay. So it's real easy to do a conversion. If you're buying a pomegranate over there and they say it's 2 shekels, you'll know that that's 60 cents or whatever. Okay. Pretty easy to do that conversion. The Jewish Mina was originally 60 shekels under the Babylonian sexagesimal system, then 50 shekels after the end of the Babylonian captivity. It was a weight of metal, not a coin. And we see an example of this in Luke 19. He says he summoned 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 pounds or minas to each one of them, or 1 pound per. And he said, go out and make money for me, okay? And one guy came back and he made 10 pounds or minas with his pound. Another guy came back, he made 5 pounds. Another guy came back and said, I buried it. I was afraid. I didn't do anything. And he said, go away. Okay, give it to the one who made 10 pounds. Okay, so that is a mina, translated pounds in the NRSV, I think is the version that I used here. All right. Jewish money, the talent. 1 talent is 60 minas. Remember, 1 mina is 50 shekels, so 3,000 shekels per talent. Okay, a weight of any metal, not a coin. A talent was originally equal to 3,600, but then 3,000 by the end of Babylonian captivity. 1 man could carry a talent, as I was mentioning before. We see in 2 Kings chapter 5. Please accept 2 talents, he said. And he tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and gave them to 2 of his servants, 1 talent each. Okay, so each one guy could carry in the backpack a talent of silver. Okay, the Jewish heavy talent, or the Jewish talent may have been twice as heavy as its Greek and Roman counterparts. So you'll see, if on the website, you'll see a conversion. If you put in 1 Jewish talent, you'll see it shows up as 2 Greek and Roman talents. All right. Now, if you go, as you notice, I've kind of put pictures on the website on these charts as we go for the different coins. Okay. And I'm going and getting them off the web because they got better pictures of the coins that I have. I bought more low quality mintage than coinage than some of the people have. If you go on the web and type in Jewish talent, you'll get these kind of pictures. You get Adam Sandler, Natalie Portman, Ben Stiller, Gal Gadot, okay? And that doesn't really fit the bill for me, so my greatest Jewish talent is, of course, Albert Einstein. Mr. E equal MC squared guy. He really was pretty good. I was actually pretty much into Einstein's theories early on, his general and special theories of relativity. Pretty interesting guy, okay? All right. Jewish talents in the Bible. We talked about this last week, but one guy owed the king 10,000 talents, and we talked about that. It was $2.6 billion. Again, you're going to have to trust me on that. That's a lot of money, okay? And another guy, this servant went out from talking to the king, and the king had forgiven him and said, whatever, go out and do your thing. And the guy went out, and another guy owed this first servant 100 denarii, $4,300, okay? And he was not happy with the guy. He said, pay me right now. All right. So that's the parable. And we talked about the different translations, how they translated 100 denarii there. Okay. And we talked, and gives you an appreciation for translators and when they're coming up with their versions. Do you translate it as an actual, what it used to be, talent and denarii, or you translate it as money? And a lot of them miss the mark when they translate as money. But if you look at the overall picture of what he was trying to say in the parable, he was talking about a huge sum of money compared to a relatively smaller sum of money, even though $4,300 is not that small sum of money, but relative to $2.6 billion is a really, really small sum of money. Okay, we talked about that last week. Okay, a talent was probably equal to an equal weight for all metals. We see in 1 Chronicles 29, again, talking about the temple. They gave for the service of the house of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 derricks of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. Okay, all of these were weights. Okay, of different metals, but the same weight, and we see that all the way throughout the Old Testament. Several examples in Exodus, Chronicles, and the Kings. Other Jewish money in the Bible, we'll not talk about any of these, but the gerah, fourth of a shekel, becca. Again, I've got verses here and verses in the book. The pim, the heavy talent, the piece of money, and the pieces of silver, all throughout the Bible. All right. Now, that's Jewish money. Hoorah, we're doing good. Now let's get to Greek money. Quick overview. We start out with the obol. Actually, we start out with things that are a lot smaller than obol. Let me pick out an obol over here. Can you see how small that is from where you're sitting? It's really tiny, right? All right, so come look at these, all right? But there were sub-denominations of the obol, okay? There was the Hemiobol. There's also the Tetradrachm, okay? I'm not going to go through all these, but there were a lot of sub-denominations of the obol. So if you imagine what a eighth of one of those looked like, that was a pretty small coin if you're talking about a weight, right? You're talking about so much silver in a particular obol or a coin, all right? An obol was 1/6 of a drachm, which is the kind of the base unit of Greek money. A litra, 1/5 of a drachm, trihemiobol, 1/4 of a drachm, diobol, 1/3 of a drachm, triobol, 1/2 a drachm, tetraobol, 2/3 of a drachm, and a drachm is base unit. Everybody keeping up? Okay. Then you start getting things that are multiple drachms. A didrachm was 2 drachma. A silver stater was 2 or 4 drachma. A tetradrachm, 2 or 4 drachma. Pentadrachm, octadrachm, decadrachm. Gold stater was 20, 28 drachma. A mina, 100 drachma. And then a talent, a Greek talent, was 6,000 drachma. All right. So we'll talk about some of these pieces that are in bold here as we go. Now, not only, again, money is a very complicated subject. Not only do you have all the different denominations of Greek coinage, you have different standards of Greek money. This is like back during early U.S. history, right? I guess Alabama had their own dollars and Georgia had their own dollars. I mean, I don't know much about U.S. history, but I know there were some currency problems early on, okay? That would be like us having today Alabama dollars and Georgia dollars. And you have to decide, how much is this one worth? And these people had to know all this stuff. When they got a drachm or a tetradrachm under one standard, they had to know it was worth only this much under this other standard. So these are all the different standards, Greek standards. The 3 most common ones are here with a star. The Corinthian, the Attic standard, Gentian standards. Okay, you see the different weight in grams. I guess these are average grams for these different standards. Money was a complicated subject to these people back then. I think it gives you a more appreciation for the money changers. All right. The obol. I just showed you an obol. The obol in its family was 1/6 of the drachm. Could be a variety of metals, copper, bronze, silver, gold, iron, but typically silver for the Greeks. That's what I have here, 2 silver obols. Denominations based on the obol. We have 1/8 of an obol, which is Hemiotetradrachm. Tetradrachm, trihemiotetradrachm, the Hemiobol, tritartamarian, the trihemiobol, diobol, triobol, tetraobol. Okay. Everybody got all that. Next up, the Litra was 1/5 of a drachm. It's silver. We do have a couple of examples in the Bible. Mary took a pound, in this case weight, okay, took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume of a litra, of this weight of perfume. Nicodemus, he took a weight of 100 pounds, 100 litra. I've got John 19:39 there. All right, so that's a litra. The dram is the base unit of the Greek money, silver. The plural dram is drachma. Drachma is, well, you see their pronunciations, a roughly equivalent to the Roman denarius. 4 drams, or drachma, I should say, is 1 tetradrachm is approximately equal to a Jewish Tyrian shekel, which I have over there. Okay, I do have a tetradrachm here also. It's kind of weird. I really studied this for a while because this tetradrachm looks almost exactly like the Tyrian shekel over there. So y'all look at this and tell me if they're different. I don't know if they sold me a Tyrian shekel by accident, but they are real similar. Right? You go and look, and they're really, really, really similar. And they're the same monetary value. They're the same weight in general, okay? But they're very similar looking, okay? That's the tetradrachm. So we see some examples in the Bible and the Apocrypha. Luke 15, or what woman having 10 silver coins, drachma, or denarii, we don't know which one, could be one or the other. If she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully till she finds it, then they rejoice and calls her friends, etc. Okay? The stater, different compositions. You can have silver staters, gold staters. You can have a Lepton stater, which is a mixture between bronze and gold and silver and whatever. Okay, so Lepton staters were very hard to value because you didn't really know what was in them. The stater was often synonymous with a didrachm, which is 2 drachma, or a tetradrachm, which is 4 drachma. Minted from the 8th century BC to about AD 50. Sub-denominations of staters exist, and staters in the Bible, potentially, we've seen these verses before, but possibly in Matthew 17:27, he said, go to the sea, cast a hook, whatever you pull out, take and give that to them for you and me. Okay, so that could be a stater. I still think it was probably a Tyrian shekel. We see a gold stater in the Bible. He summoned 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 pounds. Okay, we studied about this before. Okay, so we're not quite sure what these different monies were for these particular verses. Some we're pretty sure about, but some things we're not sure about. The tetradrachm and the talent. The tetradrachm was generally silver, is what I just showed you. In wide circulation due to the conquest of Alexander the Great, it was a Greek coin. That makes sense that Alexander the Great was the big proliferator of that. It was minted by the Polis of Athens from about 450 BC. Tetradrachms in the Bible, we've seen this verse twice before. Okay, this particular example. Don't give offense to them. Go to the sea, cast a hook, take whatever comes out of the mouth. Could be a Tyrian shekel, could be a tetradrachm. A talent, a Greek talent, was a weight, not a coin, equal to 6,000 drachms. All right, so we will start picking up with Roman money next week. And then we're going to get into the good stuff. We're going to get into a lot of math, just a little bit of math. And I'll explain to you how I came up with conversions. I think you'll find it interesting. Conversions from ancient money to current money. Did you know a cucumber cost a denarius back then? A day's wage for a cucumber. That's a whole lot of money. Do you know a cluster of grapes, what it cost? It cost about the same back then as it does today. Because clusters of grapes were very ubiquitous back then. Clusters of grapes are very ubiquitous now. Okay, so you can compare those two things. Nails, I wish we'd gotten to nails. We haven't got to nails, but it would take 16 days' wage to buy 100 nails back then. Okay, we cannot compare nails today to nails then, because I can go buy a bunch of nails at Home Depot today for just a few dollars. Okay, anyway, we will talk about all that next week.